job of getting to go first, which means I have a clean slate. I don't have to worry about what anybody else says before me. And they have to deal with whatever I said to some extent. I thought what I would do is try and tell you a little bit about what I think is the hard part about being a doctoral student and a young faculty member, and do some use the University of Rochester's doctoral program as sort of a case study for how to try and deal with that, but explain at the same time what I think is the hard part, even if you try hard to fix things, about creating a successful career as an academic. And this, I think, is true across fields. It's true in finance, but it's true virtually everywhere else. Most schools are overwhelmed with applications to PhD programs. And if you looked at the set of people who were rejected when they applied to doctoral programs, on paper they would look exceptionally talented. All right? It's not the case that every single person who applies to doctoral programs was a wonderful college student, industrious, good grades, and so on and so forth. But most of them are. And so what ends up happening is every school I know looks at this huge pool of doctoral applicants and tries to figure out from this pool, how do we select a handful of people to admit to the program? And I don't know what the answer is. I mean, judiciously, as best we can. I mean, you put all sorts of adjectives and adverbs to that. Not randomly, but I'm not sure that anybody has a good method for doing that, meaning a method for identifying who's going to be able to succeed in a doctoral program. I can tell you that in many programs, Rochester's, Chicago's, I mean, those are the ones I know best because I went through Chicago and I've been at Rochester for a long time. You know, 50 to 60% of the people who enter actually get a degree. And you say to yourself, if you were thinking of an undergraduate program or an MBA program, my God, that's a terrible failure rate. And I remember going back to a conference in Chicago at some point where they were celebrating the K-th anniversary of their program. I don't know whether K was 25 or 50 or what, 75, some big number. And Harry Roberts at that point, who, for those of you who don't know, was a statistician and was actually Gene Fama's closest advisor when he was a doctoral student, was really into TQM and quality and all this stuff, and he thought a failure rate of 50% was absolutely unconscionable. You know, that there had to be something wrong in what we were doing if we couldn't graduate more than 50 or 60% of the people who entered. And I think everybody else in the room more or less said, Harry, you're nuts. I mean, you know, it's not that we're doing something wrong, it's that it's an intrinsically hard problem to identify who's going to succeed in these kind of programs. Why is that? Roughly speaking, I think it's because the educational system, at least we have here in the U.S. and in most countries, doesn't allow people, when they're undergraduates and certainly not with their MBA students typically, the opportunity to try and be creative, you know, to try and do research. And that's what you have to do to succeed as a PhD student and as a young faculty member. You have to figure out how to do a research project that's interesting and creates knowledge and that you communicate to other people in such a way that they actually care about reading it. You know, they want to read it and they want to cite it. It doesn't do you any good if you write great papers and nobody ever actually bothers to read them, all right? Nobody will stand up like Andrew did and say, you know, Mike Lemon is making a great, you know, beginning to his future long career by writing all these papers that people read and pay attention to if people don't read and pay attention to them. Okay? So you need to be able to, I mean, that's the thing you have to learn how to do. And it's a very hard thing to do, and it's a very hard thing to predict who can do it based on watching people go to class, you know, I don't want to say regurgitate, that's a bad word, but regurgitate back to the instructor what the instructor told you, which is what typical final exams look like. And, you know, that's just a completely different process than sitting down someplace at your desk, out on the lawn if you live in a warm climate, thinking up good ideas and then figuring out how to approach those ideas so that you can bring some new knowledge to the world about what those ideas would be. Completely different process. I'm going to say it was 10 or 15 years ago, and it was partly because of this conference I was telling you about that Chicago ran. Chicago's finance group did what Rochester's finance group did at the same time. We eliminated the qualifying exam in finance as a portfolio of final exam questions. How many of you, when you took your finance qualifiers, had to study for all the various courses you took and sit down for 3 hours, 6 hours, some ungodly length of time, and answer a set of questions that are like, they're essentially, when I say a portfolio, it's like you pull one final exam question from this course, and one from this course, and one from this course, and one from this course. How many of you are still in programs that do that? All right, that's the traditional model, all right? And it was like pulling teeth to get the people at Rochester to give up on that. I mean, they just, we've always done it that way. How come, there's supposed to be some intrinsic extra learning that goes on by studying all this stuff in preparation for one exam? Our experience at Rochester had been, if you looked at how people did in the individual courses, you could forecast quite well how they were going to do when they took, answered very similar questions again at the end of the year in the written qualifying exams. And the traditional problem we had in Chicago had, I know, and I'm sure other people did too, was people who were really good at writing exam questions would get high scores in the qualifying exams and then sit down and stare at the wall in their office, if they had an office. How many of you have offices? Okay, I can tell you, when I was a grad student, there was a very small number of us who had offices, and the only reason we had offices is because we were doing RA work for a professor. Okay, so, life is much better now. Enjoy it. But in any case, these people who had done real well in qualifying exams, real well in coursework, would be, sit there, stare at the wall in front of their desk, and 2 years later, not have made any progress at all. That's a failure. I mean, that is a waste of human capital. It's a waste of the students' human capital. It's a waste of the school's capital. I mean, it's not producing output. And so we went to the model where, you take courses and we look at the grades you make, and you better make reasonable grades in the courses, but that's never a problem. Anybody who can get admitted to a doctoral program can do well in the courses. That's not quite true, but, roughly speaking, that's not the hurdle, all right? We have people, and I'm sure most of you now do this, because and it wasn't standard when I was a student. We have a first summer research paper requirement. We have a second summer research paper requirement, and the qualifying exam in finance, which is going on while I'm here speaking, is that students have to defend their second year paper in front of a committee of 3 faculty members, present a seminar, and then the judgment is made. This person, seems like they ought to be able to move forward in the doctoral program. Yes or no? Now, I will tell you, the faculty at Rochester are a bunch of softies. Most people wouldn't think that, but it must be true, because we've had the pass rate in this new form of qualifying exam has been higher than it was when we did portfolios of exam questions. All right? We tend to cut people a lot of slack. Most first-year papers are god-awful. Most second-year papers are not much better. Okay? But the fact is, everybody in the world has to go through that. I mean, that is part of the learning process. You don't start writing great papers in the beginning, all right? And you all have dissertation topics, right? I mean, that's how you got here. If there's anybody in here whose best paper comes out of their dissertation for their entire career, your career will have been a dismal failure, all right? I mean, dissertations aren't great. All right, it's what it's sort of learning to run. You don't run the 4-minute mile at the beginning. You go into training. All right, you write something. Hopefully it's good. Hopefully it's good enough to get you a good job. But that better not be your best career work. Okay, so part of the problem is getting people over the hump of taking risks. Putting your personality out on the line to be criticized, because again, as a journal editor, I can tell you that the most important skill you need to learn once you become a faculty member is to be able to take a referee report, read it, and not feel offended, not feel like it's a personal attack on your entire heritage. All right, because it isn't. All right, look around the room. Look to your left, look to your right, only, no, I'm just kidding. The fact is, the people who are refereeing your papers are to your left and your right, all right? They don't hate you. You know, they don't have any personal vendetta against you. In most cases, they don't know who you are. I mean, we try and do double-blind refereeing, meaning the author doesn't know who the referee is, and the referee doesn't know who the author is. Obviously, that's harder to do in the world of Google. You know, if you post your paper online or SSRN or something, it's not too hard to identify who the authors are. But we play the game of, you know, trying to make everything look anonymous so that you don't know whose paper you're refereeing. And therefore, it can't be personal. I mean, they're giving you an honest-to-God reaction from a reader, somebody you would like to be, somebody interested in your paper, about your paper. And they're going to typically, you know, what's the rejection rate in most of the major journals? Very high. All right, they're typically going to say things that aren't all positive. All right, I can think of very few papers in the N years, which is now getting to be too many, that I've dealt with the JFE, where a referee said in the first round, publish this paper as is, it's wonderful. You know, that doesn't happen, all right? I mean, it's such a rare event, it's not even worth worrying about. Most likely you're going to get back, you know, criticism that says this isn't perfect. Maybe it's really awful. You know, a wonderful thing to do is go to the JFE webpage and look at the list of suggestions that Renee Stoltz put together when he was the editor of the Journal of Finance. The JF took it off their webpage when he quit being the editor, so I asked him if I could put it on the JFE webpage, and he said, yeah, sure. It's wonderful. I mean, it's basically, you know, the question I have is, my paper was rejected, the referee's an idiot, what do I do? And then Renee explains, well, the referee really wasn't an idiot, and so on and so forth, and he, you know, tells you how to constructively deal with the peer review process and constructive criticism. That's one of the things you need to learn to do. In our qualifying exam, we get that process started. All right, we tell people what's wrong with their paper and how they could improve it. And, you know, the ones who have thick enough skins to be able to come back and do something constructive with that are the ones who make progress and go to a thesis proposal, and then get constructive criticism and more feedback, and then get a defense, and then go out. You know, you think to yourself, wow, I've made it. You haven't even begun to make it. All right? You may have gotten to the point where you have a paper that's worth going out on the job market and presenting it to a room full of people you've never met in your life. And believe me, they don't care about you. All right? They have no personal interest in you. What they're looking at is, do I want this guy or person down the hall from me as a colleague? All right? That's all they care about. And so you need to make a positive impression on them that they would like to have you down the hall as a colleague. All right? Admittedly young, and, you know, I mean, these are growth options, but that's what you're trying to do. All right? So we changed the qualifying exam. We have all these requirements to write papers, no matter how bad they are, just to get people through this process of learning how to construct a project and then carry it to fruition. We run a seminar where every student who's in the second year and beyond has to make a presentation on their research every year. I keep browbeating them and trying to give more than one, but they have to do it once a year. And every time a student gives a presentation, 2 students write referee reports on that presentation and distribute it to everybody else. And so it gets people, students, I mean, it's like an apprenticeship activity. It gets students in the practice of writing papers, presenting them, and critiquing them. And I try and keep the faculty out of those seminars, because the other thing we try and do is get the students in the habit of talking. Because when they only go to the faculty seminars, the outside speaker seminars, what tends to happen, and I'm sure it's true at your schools too, the faculty have no self-control. We had this discussion about behavioral finance. You know, behavior is behavior, right? Finance or whatever. Our faculty have no self-control. They can't shut up. I mean, no matter how much you try and make them. And so what ends up happening is our students, who are very bright and very able to make constructive comments, sit like bumps on a log. And I did that too when I was young, I admit, okay? Sit there like bumps on a log and listen to what everybody else is saying instead of getting in the habit of talking themselves. When I first got to Rochester, I'd been there about a month or two, and Mike Jensen came up, put his arm around me and said, "Bill, you need to start talking." I said, "Mike, I'm not comfortable doing that." He said, "No, you need to start talking." And, you know, gradually I've gotten over it, but everybody has to. We're trying to get people in the practice of doing this. So get them in the practice of thinking up creative ideas, executing them, presenting them, critiquing other people, and interacting with your colleagues. That's what it takes to succeed. It's a very risky business. I mean, ask yourself, what in your life have you ever done that has such a high failure rate? You know, and that, you know, it's not just in the doctoral programs. I said, you know, half the people don't make it who enter. Well, you know, the tenure process is like that too. There aren't very many schools where everybody they hire gets tenure. So that riskiness continues for a while. But if you succeed, it's incredibly entrepreneurial. I mean, I get to go to work. I mean, I don't get to do as much of my work as I would like anymore. Being an editor, I don't think of it as my work. You know, it doesn't have my name on it. But you know, when you're younger, I got to spend a lot more of my time doing things that had my name on it. That's fun. You know, that's not work. People are paying you pretty well to go into work and think of ideas you're excited about working on. That's another thing that's important, is you have to stay focused. Mike, am I down to 2 yet?
More or less.
More or less, okay. You know, it's a great life. And, oh, by the way, the people who don't make it don't drive taxi cabs, okay? I mean, I can tell you that, you know, among the people who have not made it through the Rochester PhD program are a number of people who are successful chaired professors because they went to somebody else's doctoral program and finished there. There are people who, you know, didn't finish our PhD program, went to, you know, industry and made a lot more money than I'm ever going to make. You know, people who were young faculty members who didn't get tenure and, as I said, are making a lot more money than I'll ever make. I mean, failure in this business is not a bad thing. Okay, it is not driving taxi cabs, but you know, it's an exciting business. But you have to be willing to take risks, and you have to develop an incredibly thick skin, and you have to be able to take a step back and take the perspective. You know, this is not personal. Okay. The last thought I will give you, and this is worthwhile, I think. I gave it to Jeff Coles when we were writing it in the room yesterday. Sort of.
Did it help him?
I don't know. I think he already knew it. But the story I try and give our PhD students when they're trying to identify research topics, people always ask, what's a good research topic? Well, it has to be something you're interested in first. That's the most important thing. The second thing is you've got to figure out how to couch the problem you're working on so that somebody else is interested in it. I used to use Merton Miller as my example. Mert's been dead for a few years, so he's not a real good example anymore. But I would, you know, students would come in and say, well, I want to work on this, that, or the other thing. And I'd say, well, that's great. Why would I care about reading that paper? You know, besides the fact you're a student and I'm a faculty member, most of the people in the world don't have that relationship with you. Ask yourself when you're trying to, you know, design a research question to work on, why would Merton Miller want to read a paper about this? Because Merton was a very eclectic, incredibly bright guy, Nobel Prize winner. You know, he has a theorem named after him. They don't even put the year of the paper after the name anymore. I mean, that's, you know, you've made it when you get to, you know, having your name affiliated with something that doesn't even have a date next to it. Okay? And Merton would read lots of things, but he wouldn't waste his time on things that he thought were just sort of mechanical or technical or, you know, whatever. So ask yourself, use Mert as the example, ask yourself, why, you know, how can I get Mert to want to read this paper? Because that's what you want to do. Now, is Jeff going next?
He is.